It had been 5 years since I stood at the altar, eyes glistening with dreams of forever. Back then, my husband's touch was electric, his gaze so intense it could set my skin aflame. Now, our life had settled into a quiet, predictable rhythm, safe, comfortable, and utterly unremarkable. Each morning followed the same choreography. He left early, coffee in hand, a distracted kiss brushed against my forehead. Evenings were a blur of television, leftover takeout, and discussions about bills or broken appliances. We shared a house, a bed, a life, yet somehow, I felt alone. It wasn't that he had changed. He was still kind, responsible, loyal. It was me. Somewhere between laundry loads and late-night emails, I realized a part of me had grown hollow, aching for something I couldn't quite name. I missed being seen. Not just noticed, but truly seen. Sometimes, I would catch my reflection while folding clothes, hair hastily tied back, makeup smudged from a long day, wearing the same faded t-shirt from college. When had I become invisible, even to myself? I didn't dare voice these feelings aloud. What could I say? I'm lonely even when you're sitting right next to me? I worried it would sound petty, ungrateful. After all, I had everything I was supposed to want: security, stability, someone who came home to me every night. Still, a small, dangerous voice whispered in the back of my mind. Is this all there is? Work offered little distraction. I buried myself in spreadsheets, deadlines, polite small talk. It was during one of these monotonous afternoons that I first noticed him, a new project manager, recently transferred from another branch. He was different, in ways that unsettled me. His laughter was easy, his compliments casual, yet lingering. At first, I brushed it off. I had learned long ago to sidestep flirtations without thinking. But there was something disarming about him, the way he remembered small details I mentioned in passing, my favorite cafe, the book I was struggling to finish. Details even my husband seemed to forget. It was harmless, I told myself. Everyone enjoyed a little attention now, and then, it didn't mean anything. And yet, when he smiled at me across the conference room, something inside me stirred, something I thought had long since withered away. That night, as I lay beside my husband, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. My heart beat faster than it should have, not from excitement, but from fear. I had crossed no lines. Not yet. But for the first time in years, I found myself yearning, not just for touch, but for recognition. And somewhere deep within, I knew this was the beginning of something I couldn't easily undo. Days slipped into weeks, and the once innocent exchanges between us grew heavier, laden with meanings unspoken. His presence became a magnet, drawing my gaze, my thoughts, my betrayals in slow, measured increments. It began innocently enough: shared lunches in crowded cafeterias, brief conversations in sterile meeting rooms. He had a way of making the mundane feel thrilling, as though every word carried a secret message meant only for me. A simple brush of his hand when passing a report sent a jolt through my veins, awakening nerves long neglected. At first, I convinced myself it was harmless. Attention was flattering, but boundaries would hold. I wore my wedding ring like a shield, a silent reminder of the promises I had made. Yet even the strongest defenses crumble under persistent siege. One evening, after a grueling project deadline, he offered to walk me to my car. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, painting the parking lot in deep, velvety shadows. Our footsteps echoed in the stillness, each one louder than the last. "You look tired," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You work too hard. Someone should take better care of you." It was a simple statement, but it unraveled something inside me. For a moment, I imagined a life where I was the center of someone's world again, not just an afterthought at the dinner table. I turned to thank him, ready to slip away into the safety of my vehicle. But he stepped closer, the space between us charged with possibility. His fingers grazed my wrist, light as a whisper. I didn't move. I couldn't. He leaned in, slow enough for me to retreat if I chose. I didn't. Our lips met in a kiss so brief, so tentative it could almost be mistaken for an accident, almost. His mouth tasted faintly of coffee and something sweeter, something forbidden. I jerked back, heart hammering against my ribs. The air between us crackled, heavy with regret and unspoken desires. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his hand still hovering near mine, uncertain. I shook my head, unable to speak. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to sever this thread before it wove itself into something irreversible. Without another word, I fled into the night, fumbling with my car keys, breathless not from exertion but from the sheer weight of temptation. As I drove home, the city lights blurred into streams of gold and crimson, a surreal reminder of the line I had nearly crossed. My palms gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Guilt clawed at my throat, but beneath it lurked something far more dangerous: exhilaration. That night, I climbed into bed beside my husband, careful not to wake him. His familiar scent, his steady breathing, should have grounded me. Instead, I lay stiff and restless, haunted by the memory of a kiss that had lasted barely a second, yet left an indelible mark. And deep down I knew the real danger had only just begun. Morning came heavy with guilt, a dull ache settling in my chest before I even opened my eyes. The memory of the kiss gnawed at my conscience, a festering wound I couldn't ignore. I moved through the motions of the day: coffee, shower, the familiar shuffle of responsibilities, yet everything felt wrong, distorted under the weight of my own betrayal. My husband noticed. He watched me across the kitchen counter, brow furrowed in quiet concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tentative, almost shy, as if afraid of the answer. I forced a smile, weak and unconvincing. "Just tired," I lied, hoping he wouldn't press further. I couldn't bear the thought of confessing, not when I didn't even understand what I was feeling myself. The hours dragged until evening settled its heavy cloak over the house. I found myself pacing our bedroom, wringing my hands, drowning in a storm of regret and confusion. I longed for absolution, for the chance to turn back time to before that moment of weakness. When he entered the room, I stiffened instinctively, preparing for another night of silence, distance, avoidance. Instead, he crossed the space between us in 3 deliberate strides, his hands finding my shoulders with surprising tenderness. "You've been so far away lately," he murmured, his forehead resting lightly against mine. "I miss you." The confession cracked something deep inside me. My defenses crumbled under the simple, honest ache in his voice. Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me. Not the distracted peck I had grown used to, but a deep, searching kiss that sent a shiver racing down my spine. His fingers traced the curve of my waist, the hollow of my back, slow and reverent, as if rediscovering me. Without a word, he began undressing me, each button undone with aching care, as though he was unwrapping something precious. His hands were both familiar and thrillingly new, sending waves of longing through me so powerful they bordered on pain. When we finally came together, it wasn't just physical. It was raw, urgent, desperate, an outpouring of all the words we hadn't spoken, the loneliness neither of us had dared admit. I clung to him, not just out of passion but out of a visceral need to anchor myself to the only truth that still made sense: him. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, his arm heavy across my waist, our breathing slowly sinking. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan, but no words were necessary. Something had shifted, something vital and healing. Tears welled behind my closed lids, tears of relief, of shame, of gratitude. I hadn't realized how starved I had been for this connection, how close I had come to throwing it all away for a fantasy. As sleep claimed me, I tightened my grip around him, silently vowing to protect this fragile rebirth we had stumbled upon. But deep in the recesses of my mind, one question lingered, unanswered and ominous. Was it already too late? Morning light spilled across the bedroom floor, soft and golden, illuminating the quiet tangle of our bodies. For a moment, I allowed myself to bask in it. The warmth of his skin against mine, the steadiness of his breath, the safety I had almost forgotten I craved. But the peace was fragile, and guilt crept in like a shadow, unwelcome and persistent. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake him. Wrapping myself in a blanket, I stood by the window, staring out at the dew-kissed garden beyond. The world looked untouched, innocent, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. Last night had been beautiful, healing, necessary, and yet, the memory of that stolen kiss clung to me, a stain I couldn't simply wash away. I hadn't crossed every line, but I had crossed enough to know I could never look at myself the same way again. I thought about how easy it had been to let loneliness guide my steps toward danger. How foolish I had been to seek outside what had only needed tending inside. Love isn't self-sustaining. It needs attention, devotion, the willingness to stay even when distance feels easier. Somewhere along the way, we had both stopped trying, retreating into routine, mistaking survival for connection. But not anymore. I refused to let silence steal from us again. Later that day, I found him sitting on the porch, nursing a cup of coffee, still in his pajamas. His hair was tousled, his face open, unguarded. Without hesitation, I slid into the seat beside him, letting my knee brush against his. He looked up and smiled, a small, weary smile, but real. "I don't want us to drift apart," I said, voice trembling with the weight of the promise I was making. "Me neither," he replied quietly, setting down his mug. His hand found mine, and he laced our fingers together with a tenderness that made my throat ache. We didn't need grand declarations or sweeping apologies. Just this, the willingness to show up, to try, to choose each other again and again. The weeks that followed were different, not because everything magically fixed itself, but because we both remembered to notice, to ask about each other's days, to reach across the divide even when it felt easier to stay silent. Sometimes it was simple gestures, a handwritten note tucked into a briefcase, a spontaneous date night, an arm wrapped firmly around my waist while watching TV. Sometimes it was harder, uncomfortable conversations, painful admissions about how close we had come to losing ourselves. But it was real. It was ours. Looking back now, I realized that temptation hadn't been the true threat. Neglect was. Complacency was. Love demands more than presence. It demands participation. As I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath my ear, I smiled to myself. Sometimes, the greatest salvation lies not in what tempts us away, but in what patiently waits for us to return.